Warning, how the 2020s resource war is becoming World War III. Look, I'm gonna tell you something nobody says out loud. The resource war of the 2020s isn't coming, it's here. Food, fuel, chips, and even water. Same battlefield, same players, different weapons. Are you sitting down? There's a suppressed thread from the 1950s that ties all of this together, and it's still running the show. Trust me, you're not ready for the treaty logic that never sunset. Here's the promise. By the 1-minute mark you'll have 3 pillars, scarcity math they hide, the 1950s switch that locked the map, and the flashpoints that chain react. Once you see this, there's no going back. Roadmap the 3 pillars will prove. Okay, so here's the thing. Strip away the speeches and flags and borders move for one reason. Flows. Oil, gas, grain, electricity, data, fresh water, the metals inside chips and magnets. Those streams decide who eats, who builds, who fights, and who waits in the dark. Allies form to keep flows steady. Wars start when flows get squeezed. That's the frame. Now let me show you how it actually works in the 2020s. Pillar 1, Scarcity Math. Most people think scarcity is about empty shelves. It's not. It's geometry, narrow lanes, single points of failure, and components you can't swap. Think oil choke points, Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, the Turkish Straits, Malacca. Close one, and it's not just barrels delayed, it's airline routes bending, insurers walking, fertilizer spiking. Europe shifted to LNG fast. Asia depends on it daily. If a single terminal goes quiet, prices don't rise linearly. They jump in steps, because ships and storage don't teleport. Same with food. Black Sea grain, Danube barges, Red Sea and Suez lanes are grain arteries. When those vessels detour, you don't just pay more for bread. You pay more for chickens, eggs, and cooking oil 3 months later. Scarcity hides in timing. And chips. Everyone talks fabs, but the quiet choke lives upstream. Extreme ultraviolet lithography, neon gas, palladium targets, gallium and germanium, photoresists. Lose a gas plant in one city and 6 weeks later a car plant in another country halts over a missing controller nobody's heard of. Rare earths and magnet metals, neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, look like alphabet soup until an EV motor overheats or a missile can't steer. Water. It's the invisible cap. Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, Indus, Colorado, and in the Gulf, desal plants tie water to grid power and gas. One outage, 2 systems crash. Here's the reveal. In the 2020s, a single disruption almost always hits 3 systems at once. Close Bab el-Mandeb. Tankers detour, air traffic shifts, insurers reprice risk. That's oil, food, and flights all nudged together. Scarcity isn't an empty bin, it's a synchronized stumble. Pillar 2, the 1950s switch. This is the part that sounds boring until you realize it never turned off. In the early Cold War, security law and strategy fused around corridor control. Internal security acts defined, subversion broadly. Maritime doctrines hardened sea lanes and basing rights. Development banks financed extraction and routes. Strategic stockpiles for oil, food, and metals were normalized as permanent wartime logic. Nuclear logistics demanded secure uranium and sea control. None of that sunset. The language changed, the machinery stayed. And then the map got new minerals. The old guardrails built for oil and wheat now steer wafers, magnets, transformers, and even data centers that drink power and water like small towns. Hardware needs minerals. Software needs hardware. So the 1950s corridors quietly absorbed 2020s tech. Pillar 3, Flashpoints, not hypotheticals, hinges. 5 you need to hold in your head. 1, Hormuz. A real closure isn't just price, it's a calendar. Week 1, insurers bulk. Week 2, storage tops out. Week 3, refineries crack diets they can't digest. 2, Red Sea and Suez, forced detours around the Cape and your freight clock adds weeks. Diesel follows. Food follows. 3, Taiwan Strait. It's not only fabs in Taiwan. It's neon gas routes, advanced tool shipments, and the logistics of moving ultra-clean inputs across an edgy map. 4, the Nile. The dam cascade isn't just a regional spat, it's megawatts, acres, and calories with neighbors staring at their buffers. 5, the Arctic lanes and sub-sea cables. As ice thins, LNG and data become exposed threads, tempting cheap, deniable attacks. Here's where it gets interesting. Each flashpoint amplifies the others. Close Hormuz and LNG titans, pushing Europe to burn more coal, raising freight costs, squeezing budgets that maintain naval patrols in the Red Sea. A Taiwan scare sends chip inventories into hoarding mode, hitting carmakers just as fuel prices rise, which cuts flights that normally carry high-value air freight, the same planes that move chip trays. The Nile heats up, power flickers and fertilizer production pauses, raising grain import needs through Suez, which is already strained. So the roadmap. I'm going to prove the scarcity math with real choke points and the way one valve twists three systems. Then we'll go back to the 195 switch, the quiet legal and strategic cement that set the corridors. Finally, we'll walk the 5 flashpoints and show the chain reaction pattern. Remember these open loops, the Hormuz day-by-day math, the rare earths processing monopoly that isn't at the mine, and a desalination attack scenario most planners whisper about but won't brief. Keep those in mind as we move because the stakes aren't abstract. This touches inflation you feel, jobs that vanish, tech that slows, and migration shocks that test politics hard. Once you understand the frame, the headlines stop looking random. Flows, corridors, and timers, that's the playbook. Let me show you. Pillar 1, the scarcity map of the 2020s. Here's what actually happens when the map tightens. Start with oil and gas. 4 sea gates matter more than speeches. Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, the Turkish Straits, and Malacca. Hormuz is the big one. Close it even partially, and insurers hike rates so high captains wait. 1 week of waiting fills storage in Iraq. 2 weeks forces shut-ins. 3 weeks and refineries panic because they're built to eat certain crude grades, not whatever shows up. Swap the diet too fast and equipment breaks. Prices move in jumps, not slopes. That's why a rumor alone moves diesel before physical barrels stop. Bab el-Mandeb is smaller on a map, bigger in effect. Force tankers and box ships around the Cape and you add weeks to the clock. The fuel burned to detour raises costs on bulk freight and container lanes. European diesel tightens because Middle East shipments slow. Asian refiners chase spot cargoes. You feel it at the pump and at the grocery because logistics is the hidden ingredient in everything you buy. The Turkish Straits look like a postcard, but grain and oil slip through that narrow S-curve. Any pause there stacks vessels across the Black Sea, and suddenly Danube barges and rail become pressure valves that were never sized for prime time. Malacca's lane is the Asia lifeline. It doesn't have to close to hurt. Drone scares or a single attack can push big carriers to run alternate routes through Lombok or Sunda. Extra miles mean extra fuel and fewer trips per ship per month. Multiply that by thousands, and the global fleet quietly shrinks. LNG is the 2020s wildcard. Europe jumped to it fast, Asia already lives on it. But LNG isn't oil. You can't just slosh it in any tank. It needs cryogenic ships, timed slots at terminals, and rigid safety buffers. Miss one berthing window and the next is days away. If a single compressor train goes down at a mega plant, that's a hole you don't fill with paper. Traders scramble, utilities hedge, industry curtails. Gas prices leap, power prices follow, and aluminum smelters blink off because they can't eat volatility. Food arteries ride the same lanes. Black Sea grain isn't just wheat, it's a schedule. When corridors tighten, ship owners reprice risk. That pushes marginal buyers out of the auction. The knock-on is weird. Chickens and eggs go first because feed costs spike fast. Then cooking oil because seed shipments miss seasons. By the time bread rises, 3 supply layers have already cracked. That's why a calm headline can hide a tense silo. Now chips, people fixate on fabs, but the skeleton is upstream. Neon gas purity from a handful of plants. Palladium targets for sputtering. Gallium and germanium refining. Photoresists with long, delicate chains of suppliers. Take out one rare gas distillation column, and 6 weeks later a microcontroller vanishes from a car line. It's not dramatic. A plant manager just tapes an idle sign and sends a shift home. Multiply that across thousands of cheap parts, and you get $1 billion slowdown with no explosion, no headline. Rare earths and magnet metals make it sharper. Neodymium and Praseodymium build the muscle. Dysprosium keeps that muscle from melting in heat. The choke isn't the mine, it's separation and alloying. That processing is concentrated. Sanctions sound tough, but force a spike and EV makers pause orders, drone producers ration, and even wind turbines face delays. You can't just substitute copper coils and take the efficiency hit in a missile seeker or a high-end motor. Physics doesn't care about press releases. Water runs under all of it. Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, Indus, Colorado, each is a ledger where snowpack, dams, and politics set the line. In the Gulf, desalination ties water to gas and grid stability. Intake pipes, high-pressure pumps, transformer yards, and SCADA controls are single points that keep whole cities calm. Hit power and water tilts, hit water and power strains. Buffers are measured in days, not months. And once you truck water at city scale, you're not managing, you're evacuating. Here's the key reveal. In the 2020s, one disruption hits 3 systems at once. A drone swarm near Bab el-Mandeb. Oil detours, container lines reshuffle, airlines shift flight paths to dodge risk zones and burn more fuel. That's energy, food, and flights all nudged together. A hiccup in neon gas. Chip output dips, auto inventories thin, air freight tightens because high-value electronics normally ride passenger jets, which are already canceling routes for fuel costs. A low Nile season. Power rationing cuts fertilizer output. Grain imports rise. Suez-bound vessels queue behind rerouted energy cargoes. Most people think this is bad luck. It's structure. Decades of chasing efficiency built tall, narrow towers, lowest inventory, longest just-in-time chains, biggest single plants. It worked when risk felt cheap. Now the map is loud. Insurance talks with drones, weather talks with dams, a blockade whispers to chip makers, and the signal always arrives faster than the fix because markets move in hours and steel and concrete move in years. So when you see a price chart jump, don't ask what broke. Ask which valve twisted 3 ways. That's the scarcity map. Once you see it, the next part snaps into place. Who can reach the valves and who writes the rules that decide where they sit. Micro story, the week 3 corridors died. Last winter, a friend in freight pinged me one line. We just lost 3. I thought he meant clients. He meant corridors, and in 7 days the world quietly bent. Day 1, an airline hole opened over the Middle East. Not a full closure, but enough missiles, drones, and NOTAMs that dispatchers red-lined routes. Flights that used to skate the Gulf hopped south over Egypt or north through the Caucasus. Every detour added minutes, then an hour, then 2. Jet fuel burn jumped. Crews timed out. The app still showed departures, but a chunk of the map went dark to wings. Day 2, the Red Sea lit up. Cheap drones near Bab el-Mandeb spooked insurers, and suddenly the Suez shortcut wasn't a shortcut. Box ships and product tankers blinked, called brokers, and turned for the Cape. No press conference, no dramatic footage, just AIS tracks curving around Africa like 1,000 tiny decisions made the same way. Schedules slipped a week, maybe 2. Freight forwarders said, minor delays, then stopped answering the phone. Day 3, the Ukraine war pinched the sky again. More airspace advisories over the Black Sea and into Eastern Europe stacked with Russia's ongoing no-go zone. Cargo carriers that relied on the high road to Asia had to thread narrower paths. Slots at the remaining corridors vanished by lunch. If you weren't already booked, you weren't flying that week. By day 4, a mid-tier car plant in Central Europe hit pause. Not because the SUV line ran out of steel, because a tiny control module did arrive. The plane that should have carried the urgent pallet never left Doha after the detour math broke the crew schedule. The backup seat in the belly of a passenger jet? Gone too. Those flights were burning extra fuel to go around the hole and had swapped belly cargo for more reserve. Day 5, a second hit. A wiring harness supplier in North Africa emailed force majeure. Their resin feedstock was on a container ship that decided Suez wasn't worth the risk premium. New ETA? Add 18 days, maybe 24. The harness press sat ready. Workers showed up. No material. The accountant's spreadsheet still said inventory inbound. Reality said stand down. Day 6, prices started to whisper. Not a crash, a creep. Oil futures up, marine insurance up, jet fuel surcharges added at checkout. Freight quotes got valid for 2 hours tags. Supermarket buyers saw poultry feed offers expire before lunch. Bakers called mills and got silence. Day 7, the cascade showed its teeth. Airlines trimmed frequencies, then dropped routes. Air cargo bidders fought for whatever uplift remained and pushed high-value electronics first, shoving everything else into warehouses. European diesel markets tightened because east of Suez barrels were late, and refineries juggling crude diets couldn't make up the slate overnight. A fertilizer distributor in the Med paid through the nose for ammonia because a gas-heavy producer upstream dialed back on price swings. Farmers heard and delayed purchases. That delay is a harvest in 3 months. Here's the part my friend said that stuck. Nothing exploded. No refinery inferno, no sunk supertanker. Just 3 corridors blinking yellow at the same time and every minor adjustment compounding. Dispatchers add a waypoint. Captains add a buffer. Brokers add a premium. Plant managers add a pause. Households add $1 at the pump. The sum of small adds becomes a shock. And the moral, when 3 corridors die in a week, the system doesn't scream. It coughs and you miss it until the bill lands. Chokepoint power, how few actors move the world. Okay, so who can twist the valves? This is where it gets uncomfortable. A handful of actors can nudge prices, reroute fleets, and scramble calendars without firing a shot you'll ever see on TV. Start with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. Look, I'm gonna tell you something. They don't need a Navy parade to close it. Mines you can lay with fast boats, shore-launched anti-ship missiles tucked into wadis, drones buzzing low, and a few quiet boardings, that's enough. The playbook isn't total shutdown, it's credible risk. Insurers raise premiums, captains idle, and within days storage in Basra and Karg sweats. Week 2, shut-ins begin. And the crazy part. Iran can drip this on and off like a metronome, keeping markets jumpy while never handing an easy target. That's leverage. Now Bab el-Mandeb and the Houthis. Cheap quadcopters with shaped charges versus billion-dollar shipping schedules. You don't have to sink a ship, you just have to scare 10. A few strikes near the lane, a claimed hit on a tanker's superstructure, and suddenly Sui's math breaks. Reroute around the Cape, burn more fuel, lose 2 weeks, and the freight rate quotes get a new zero. The Houthis don't own the sea, but they can raise the price of using it, and that's power. Turkey sits on the Bosporus and Dardanelles like a hand on a faucet. Grain from Ukraine and Russia, oil and products from the Black Sea, everything squeezes through those narrow turns. Turkey doesn't have to close them, it can slow them. Inspections, safety pauses, daylight-only transit for certain hulls, a few bureaucratic turns and you've stacked 100 ships in the Sea of Marmara. Wheat bids move. Danube barge rates spike. Someone in Cairo redoes the bread subsidy math. China's hold isn't a straight, it's a spreadsheet. Critical minerals and the processing that turns dust into muscle. The mine is just a hole. The choke is separation, oxides to metals, alloys to magnets. That chain is concentrated in a few parks and plants. If Beijing tweaks export licenses on gallium, germanium, or magnet alloys, EV lines shiver and missile seekers wait. Sanctions sound tough until you realize substitutions cost performance, and physics doesn't negotiate. Most people think rare earths are hype. Then a factory maintenance memo lands. Dysprosium allocation reduced, thermal envelope narrowed. Translation, run slower or melt stuff. Russia's lever is old but sharp. Molecules. Pipelines into Europe taught everyone what forced substitution looks like. Refineries retooling, diesel tightness ripping through freight, and gas to power spikes dimming smelters. And it's not just pipelines. LNG cargoes swing, nuclear fuel assemblies and enrichment services travel on quiet contracts. And if Russia pinches any of that, schedules slip. The Kremlin doesn't need to cut flows to zero. Trim 5, hint at 10, and the forward curve does the rest. Here's the twist most people miss. Private infrastructure is now a strategic actor. Cloud data centers aren't just racks, they're power hogs with water needs sitting on a handful of high-capacity substations. You tap a transformer yard or a major fiber landing station and suddenly a region's AI workloads throttle and payment networks lag. Undersea cables. A fishing trawler accident here, a repair ship delay there, and latency maps redraw. Airlines, finance, ports, all feel it. Refuel hubs and maintenance ecosystems add another quiet choke. Knock out a Jet A farm at a major layover city or shutter a handful of MRO bays with a cyber incident, and long-haul rotations wobble. Remember, belly cargo rides those same planes. Lose flights, lose uplift, and high-value electronics fight for slots. Prices rise before headlines form. Everything changes when you see how few hands can push many levers. But this is important because the tools are asymmetric. A $100,000 drone can force a $100 million convoy. A minister's signature on a customs directive can strand billions in grain. A license tweak on a metal no one can pronounce can idle a car plant a continent away. Once you understand that, a question drops. How many levers matter most? Remember this number? 5 valves control half the flow. Not the whole world, but enough to bend it. 1. Hormuz for oil and condensate. 2. Bab el-Mandeb/Suez for energy and boxes. 3. Bosporus for grain and Black Sea liquids. 4. Critical mineral processing nodes, especially magnets and chip inputs. 5. Tier 1 data power junctions, places where fiber, substations, and cloud farms stack together. You might be thinking, what about Malacca, Panama, the big pipelines? They're real, but the 5 I just named are where a small shove makes a big mess fast in the 202s. Hit 2 at once and you're in the 3 systems stumble zone we just walked through. Hit 3 and you start clocks leaders can't stop with money. This rabbit hole goes deeper because levers attract counter-levers. Patrols, insurers, war risk pools, convoying, export controls, quiet swaps of stockpiles, and mirror moves in cyber all start in days, but steel and concrete answers take years. Markets move in hours, militaries fix in weeks. That gap is where risk lives. Trust me, you're not ready for the next turn because the obvious fix people shout. Energy independence doesn't save you from valves you don't own. And once you see why, the map reads different. False ending 1. Why energy independence won't save you. Most people think if a country pumps enough, it's safe. Sounds right, but it breaks on contact with reality. Oil isn't one liquid, it's dozens of grades. Your refinery is a picky eater. Heavy versus light, sweet versus sour. Switch too fast and you crack units, foul catalysts, and blow your emissions limits. We'll just use our own only works if your pipes, rail, and dock slots actually connect that barrel to that refinery at the right time. Geography wins arguments. Refining is the first trap. The US, for example, built huge complexes tuned for heavier imports over decades. Shale unlocked light, sweet, great, until you realize Gulf refiners can't gulp it all at once without dumping margins or exporting the excess. If Hormuz tightens and the global slate shifts, price is set at the margin in Rotterdam and Singapore, not in your backyard wellhead. Local barrels, global pain. Pipelines are the second trap. Molecules don't teleport. Crude lines run north-south. Product lines run where people live. Capacity is booked months ahead. You can flare a little, rail a little, truck a tiny bit, but physics punishes improvisation. Ask anyone who's tried to shove a surge through a pipe designed for steady flow. Pressures spike, batching slips, contamination claims pile up. Meanwhile, the ship you needed waited 3 days, missed tide, and your window moved. Fine, we'll electrify. Love it. But electricity isn't free of fuel. Gas peaker plants cover your dinner hour. Hydropower depends on snowpack. Nuclear needs enriched fuel assemblies on exact schedules. Transformers, those humming beasts, are copper, steel, and long lead times. Lose gas flexibility and you burn diesel. Lose diesel and your repair trucks don't roll. The grid is a stitched quilt of metals you can't conjure in a crisis. Copper is the quiet killer. Every EV, every solar farm, every substation eats miles of it. Mines are slow, smelters slower, and new lines fight permits for years. Dig faster doesn't move electrons tomorrow, and when gas prices jump, smelters throttling supply push copper up, which raises capex for grids, which slows the very projects meant to escape volatile fuel. That's the loop. Uranium sounds like a way out. But the pinch isn't the ore, it's conversion and enrichment capacity plus specialty steel and forgings in the reactor fuel cycle. Those are global shops with specialist crews. If sanctions or chokepoints touch any one step, fuel reload schedules slip. Nuclear is steady until its logistics are. Now price setting. Even if you produce a surplus, your domestic market rides an index. Traders don't care about your flag, they care about replacement cost. Close Bab el Mandeb and the gasoline at your corner station reflects a ship owner's new war risk premium half a world away. Politicians can cap prices for a month. Inventories laugh, then run dry. After that comes rationing, not savings. So the decoupled talk hits hard physics. You can build buffers, sure, but independence is the wrong word. We run on systems, not slogans, and systems cross borders because it was cheaper that way for decades. Rewiring takes steel, copper, transformers, terminals, and time measured in elections. Markets move in hours. That mismatch is where the real risk lives. Are you sitting down? Here's the kicker most miss. Even if you solve molecules and electrons, you still choke on materials. Magnets, wafers, high-grade silicon steel for transformers. Those chains run through the same narrow lanes we just mapped. A refinery you control won't fix a missing dysprosium shipment. A full gas storage cavern won't spin an EV motor without neodymium iron boron. Therefore, produce more isn't a shield, it's a starting line. You still need the lanes open, the processing nodes friendly, the insurers willing, and the grid metals flowing. And if that feels bleak, it should, because the present looks rigged. Which is why, to understand how we got stuck with valves we don't own, we need to go back, way back to the switch that locked the map and never turned off. Pillar 2, the 1950s switch that locked the map. So let's roll the clock back to the 1950s, because this is where the wiring got buried in the walls. The early Cold War felt like a street fight with nuclear shadows, and governments wrote rules fast. The language said internal security and containment, but the effect was corridor control, who moves what through where on whose terms. Start with the security laws. Legislatures passed acts that defined subversion so broadly it wrapped labor, ports, telecom, and transport into the security perimeter. If you could slow a refinery, sway a dock strike, or jam a radio relay, you weren't just a nuisance, you were a national risk. That pushed police, intel, and commerce into one tent. The word choices were about communists. The tools they built grabbed supply lines. Then maritime doctrine hardened. Freedom of navigation didn't mean do what you want. It meant major navies claimed a standing reason to show up along key lanes. Forward basing rights grew from temporary to standard. Airfields, fuel farms, munitions depots, and repair yards bloomed near choke points. Carriers were the billboard, but the plumbing under them, tugs, pilots, charts, radio beacons, quietly fixed sea highways in place. Once you pour that much concrete, the map stops being ideas and starts being habit. Development banks came next with velvet gloves and steel cores. Loans for modernization, favored extraction and routes, ports, pipelines, dams, rail spines, export terminals. The logic was growth. The result was lock-in. Crops pointed at ships, mines pointed at smelters, and those pointed at hulls steaming to specific markets. Miss a payment? Policy conditions nudged you to keep the faucet open. Soft words, hard flows. Strategic stockpiles sealed it. Oil, grains, rubber, certain metals. Governments normalized the idea that you hold buffers like an army holds ammo. That's wartime logic made permanent. To run stockpiles, you need intel on flows, leasing options on storage, preferential berths, and legal teeth to commandeer logistics in a pinch. Once built, that machinery doesn't retire. It waits. Nuclear logistics finished the picture. If your reactor fuel has to arrive on time and your submarines need secure lanes, you protect uranium supply, conversion plants, and shipping routes like arteries. That drove sea control, aerial patrol grids, and quiet deals for basing rights. The nuclear age didn't just change weapons, it standardized guards along the corridors. Here's the kicker, none of this sunset. Laws got renamed, doctrines were updated, agencies merged or rebranded, but the operating system kept booting. When the ideological temperature cooled, the pipes still hummed, the bases still hosted sorties, the banks still loved export logic, and the stockpiles still rotated. And then the resource list changed. The 2020s didn't throw away the old guardrails, they slotted new cargo into them. Wafers ride the same legal protections as wheat once did. Magnet metals follow the same port math oil once owned. Transformers and copper, grid bones, move under regimes written for strategic materials a lifetime ago. Data centers. They look like telecom plus power plant plus water user, and they sit under that big umbrella of critical infrastructure born in the 1950s. So even when politicians talk tech, the enforcement still thinks corridors. Now the quiet continuity nobody likes to say out loud. Security and commerce fused in that decade. Export controls, shipping registries, insurance pools, and port state control were built with ideological edges, but they live on as levers. You can flag a shipment, delay a hull, yank a license, or freeze a payment with a security pretext, and it all looks by the book. The book was printed in the 195s. But wait, you might say, wasn't this about bad guys? Sometimes, sure, but the effect didn't care about virtue. It built a habit, protect the corridor, prefer the known route, punish the detour. Cheap beats flexible until flexible is all that works. And by then, resilience looks like heresy against 5 decades of optimization. Everything changes when new minerals walk onto the stage. Chips need photoresists, neon, palladium, and tools that cross borders under dual-use labels. Magnets need neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium, processed in clusters far from the mine mouth. Grids crave copper, aluminum, silicon, steel. Data needs fiber landings, diesel backup, mega transformers, clean water. Each slot into familiar scaffolds, basing near lanes, rules that bless secure supply, and financial rails that reward scale over redundancy. Here's a quick behind-the-scenes story. A mid-2000s export control list got revised to reflect emerging technologies. The working group was half security, half trade. Their case studies: old smuggling routes from the 1960s repurposed for new parts, lithography submodules instead of gyros, alloy powders instead of bearings. The mindset didn't change. Lock the corridor, monitor the nodes, keep the list moving. And the map ossified, not frozen ossified. It still flexes, but around fixed bones. Hormuz patrol cycles, Suez pilotage norms, Bosporus traffic rules, Malacca risk premiums, and those quiet mineral parks with their own bonded gates. The players rotate. The stage stays. So when a 202's flashpoint lights up, the response paths follow grooves cut 70 years ago. Task forces sortie on schedules set by basing distance. Insurers open war risk pools with clauses borrowed from older crises. Export licenses tighten with language echoed from subversion days. Development banks talk resilience while financing bigger, single nodes because spreadsheets love scale. The plot thickens because the list of what's strategic just got longer. And the minerals you never thought about? They took front row seats without moving their chairs. New cargo, old corridors, that's the switch. It clicked in the 195s and it never turned off. Now watch what happens when those new resources meet the old map under real pressure. The new oil, chips, magnets, grids, data. Okay, so here, that's where the cargo changes, but the corridors don't. What I'm about to show you turns tech into logistics. Semiconductors are the new battleships, magnets are the new fuel, the grid is the new rail, and data is the new convoy. Once you see how each one depends on hidden inputs and fixed lanes, you'll never hear the word innovation the same way again. Chips first. Everyone stares at fabs because they're shiny and cost more than aircraft carriers. But fabs are violins, the orchestra lives upstream. Extreme ultraviolet tools, power modules, photoresists, ultrapure gases, and months of recipes that can't miss a beat. Lose one upstream box, a resist blend, a neon purifier, a ceramic component, and the line drops yields. Missing chips don't announce themselves. A board just fails test, a bin runs low, a vendor whispers allocation, and a product launch slides 6 weeks. That's why semiconductors feel like the new oil. The entire stack needs stable lanes, friendly licenses, and predictable power and water. If a flashpoint brushes any of those, wafers go from flow to drip. Most people think you can stockpile chips. You can stockpile some, but bleeding-edge parts age like milk, not wine. Firmware changes, nodes shift, contracts lock to specific customers. And the kicker, tools and spares for the fab itself move in the same narrow corridors we just mapped. So when Taiwan jitters or Suez slows, a Dutch shipment for a US fab can still get stuck behind a risk premium set in a different sea. That's the old corridors steering the new silicon. Magnets next. This is going to sound crazy, but the quiet monarch of the 202s is a ring of metal you'll never see, neodymium iron boron with a hint of dysprosium. That magnet spins EV motors, steadies drone rotors, drives missile fins, and sits inside the servos that move factory arms. The mine doesn't choke you, the processing does. Separation, oxides to metals, strip casting, grain boundary diffusion. Each step is a plant with recipes guarded like state secrets. Concentrate that chain in a handful of parks, and a single export license tweak can echo from a wind farm order to a fighter jet maintenance schedule. Substitute ferrite? Enjoy a weight and efficiency penalty that wrecks your range or your turn rate. Physics keeps the scorecard. Are you sitting down? Even transformer cores care which metals show up. High-grade electrical steel and amorphous alloys need exacting process lines. If energy prices spike or a sanctions loop gums the rollers, lead times jump from months to a year. That's magnets and grid metals tugging the same leash. Now the grid, the bones and blood of everything else. People say electrify everything like it's a software patch. The grid answers with copper, aluminum, silicon steel, transformer oil, ceramics, and crews who know how to rig a 200-ton core. Transformers aren't boxes you order overnight. They're bespoke, heavy, and booked. Lose a big one in a storm or a strike, and you can't just backorder your way out. Meanwhile, every new data center wants 100 megawatts and a guaranteed tap. New solar wants in. EV fast charge corridors want megawatt-scale taps at highway exits. All of that leans on substations that were built for a world with fewer spikes and flatter peaks. Everything changes when you realize grids and chips share the same upstream pain. A fab drinks water and eats power like a steel mill. A data center gulps power and needs water for cooling unless you burn land on dry solutions. Put 3 of those on one substation, and you've built a quiet choke point where a single transformer fault knocks out AI training runs, payments processing, and the plant making the chips for your car. Behind the scenes, utilities are juggling load shape with gas peakers and batteries. But if gas tightens or copper prices jump, the add capacity plan runs into the same metal bottlenecks we already mapped. Data last, we treat the cloud like fog. It's rebar and fiber. Cables cross choke seas, land at a few crowded beaches, and crawl inland to campuses that drink 30 million gallons a day and light a small city. Tap the fiber near a strait, hit the substation feeding a hyperscale campus, or pollute the water intake the cooling system needs, and your software company becomes a line item on a grid repair schedule. Latency isn't just gaming lag. It's market spreads, airline dispatch, port gates, and chip design teams trying to sync over continents. So therefore, the resource war shifted from wells to wafers, coils, cores, and cores again, the CPU kind. Same corridors, new cargo. A Suez scare becomes a lead time slip for lithography modules. A Bosporus slowdown nudges grain, then power, then aluminum, then conductor prices. A Hormuz crunch hikes LNG, which pushes utilities into coal, which squeezes transformer replacement budgets while data centers keep knocking for hookups. Wait until you see the rare earth cartel math, because the price you pay for a magnet isn't set at the mine. It's set at the oxide line and the alloy furnace. and those sit where policy and power prices bless them. Once you understand that, the 5 flashpoints stop being regional and start looking like switches wired into everything you touch. Pillar 3, the 5 flashpoints of a resource world war. Brace yourself because this is where valves become tripwires. 5 flashpoints. Each one can light the others. Hold them in your head and watch how the timers start. Flashpoint 1, the Strait of Hormuz. Most people picture a dramatic blockade. The real danger is a calibrated squeeze. Day 1, underwriters raise war risk. A third of seaborne crude and a chunk of global LNG suddenly carry a surcharge nobody budgeted. Captains wait. Week 1, storage fills at Basra and Karg. Iraq and parts of the Gulf start shut-ins. Week 2, refineries face the diet problem. Crude grades don't match, so yields break. Aviation fuel tightens early because it's a light cut. Diesel follows when middle distillates miss targets. Airlines trim schedules. Freight prices rise. Week 3 to 4, strategic reserves draw but replace rates lag. Fertilizer prices jump on gas spikes. Crop calendars shift. That's not a headline, it's a clock. Every extra day raises the odds of rationing talk and risky military moves to clear the lane. Flashpoint 2, the Red Sea and Suez. You don't need a sunk ship, just a few credible strikes near Bab el-Mandeb and a video of shrapnel on a deck. Box ships and product tankers reroute around the Cape. Add 10-18 days. Bunker fuel burn rises, cruise timeout, port rotations snap. Europe's diesel imports slip, Asia's refinery exports juggle. Cold chains for food stretch and break at the edges. Bananas, berries, pharma. And here's the kicker. All that extra fuel burn lands in spot markets that are already tight from Hormuz jitters. 2 flashpoints, 1 pump. Flashpoint 3, the Taiwan Strait. Everyone fixates on fabs in Hsinchu and Tainan. The upstream is just as fragile, ultra-pure gases, photoresists, quartzware, and tool modules that move on tight licenses. A near miss in the strait, a few plan exercises, and shippers balk. Air corridors thin. High-value chip trays ride passenger jets, cut those flights and uplift collapses. Meanwhile, customers in Europe and the US start hoarding components. Allocation emails go out. Auto plants switch to build-shy, cars without one controller stacked in lots. 6 weeks later, electronics shelves look fine, then tilt. The lag hides the hit. Flashpoint 4, the Nile Dam Cascade. This isn't a regional spat. Megawatts mean pumps, pumps mean acres, acres mean calories. A low year plus a contested release schedule and Egypt's grid strains. Rolling blackouts hit fertilizer plants and mills. Buffer stocks shrink. Cairo increases grain tenders just as Suez traffic is wobbling from Red Sea risk. Ethiopia faces its own balancing act, power versus downstream neighbors with internal politics heating. One hot summer, one drought cycle, and you've got migration pressure mixing with food inflation in cities built on subsidies. That's a timer you can't diffuse with a press release. Flashpoint 5, the Arctic lanes and the undersea web. As ice thins, LNG out of the high north and new sea routes look tempting, but search and rescue is thin, and deniable sabotage rides the water column. A fishing trawler drags an anchor through a cable bundle, latency spikes across continents, markets and logistics desync. An LNG carrier delays in the northern sea route after an ice advisory, pushing European gas buyers into pricier slots. A second cable cut near a different strait adds another 50 milliseconds where it hurts. Payments, aviation dispatch, port cranes, cheap attacks, rich targets. Now chain reaction logic. Close or even squeeze Hormuz and LNG tightens. Europe burns more coal to save gas. Emissions go up. Carbon prices swing. Grid operators defer maintenance. That weakens resilience right as Suez detours lift diesel costs and port congestion grows. A Taiwan scare sends chip buyers into panic allocations, pulling air freight away from pharma just as Red Sea flight paths lengthen. The Nile gets a dry year, power flickers, fertilizer output slips, Egypt tenders bigger for wheat that's now late around the Cape. Governments tap stockpiles across fuels and grains, replacement cargoes face the same choke points. Markets move in hours, navies fix in weeks, infrastructure in years. That gap is the danger zone. You probably think this needs all 5 at once. It doesn't. 2 is enough to start the clock. 3 makes leaders gamble. And that's where it gets interesting. Each flashpoint is tempting to touch with proxies. A drone here, a navigation incident there, a tariff on a mineral, a license tweak on a tool. It's escalation by paperwork and parts. Micro story, 30 seconds. A neon gas plant in a city you've never heard of takes a maintenance outage, routine. The same week, a training exercise narrows flights near Taiwan. Air uplift falls. Chip tool spares to Arizona slip a week. Yields dip. A console launch moves. Meanwhile, Red Sea insurers raise rates 15%. A European fertilizer plant pauses on gas costs for 1 month, missing a delivery window to North Africa. Cairo increases tenders. Suez queues are longer. Prices jump. No bombs on TV, just charts bending together. Remember what we said earlier. One disruption hits 3 systems in the 202s. These 5 flashpoints are the best multipliers. Hormuz moves fuel, planes, fertilizer. Red Sea moves boxes, diesel, food. Taiwan moves wafers, tools, air cargo. The Nile moves power, crops, people. The Arctic and cables move gas and data, the 2 fluids modern life can't lose. So brace yourself. Next, I'm going to walk you through 45 days without Hormuz, week by week, so you can feel how fast the timers run and why leaders make worse choices after day 30. Scenario run, 45 days without Hormuz. Are you sitting down? Because once this clock starts, it doesn't stop for speeches. Week 1. Day 1, underwriters flip the switch. War risk premiums surge. Captains call owners. Owners call charters. Half the hulls slated for Hormuz anchor outside the lane, engines idling. Satellite shots show dots stacking in safe water. Futures jump by lunch. By day 3, Basra and Karg terminals hum, but storage behind them starts to sweat. Iraq's tanks weren't built for this pace. Day 5, spot cargoes from outside the Gulf grab a premium. West African and North Sea barrels find new friends. Airlines quietly up fuel surcharges you won't notice yet. By day 7, refiners in Europe whisper diet because their expected Arab light didn't show and the replacement slate is messy. It's still calm on TV. The calendar is already loud. Week 2, storage tops, that's the hinge. Iraq and parts of the Gulf face a choice, flare or shut-in. They start curtailments. Shut-ins ruin reservoirs if you rush. Engineers hate this. Meanwhile, refiners begin blend gymnastics. Sweeter crudes cut with heavier, yields off target. Aviation fuel tightens early, diesel wobbles next. Underwriters hold the line. A few brave or desperate hulls try night transits under escort rumors, then think better and peel off. Gas matters now. LNG cargoes out of Qatar sit. Utilities in Europe buy alternatives. Asia scrambles for PNG and spot. Power prices flicker up in places that thought winter was over. Fertilizer traders blink and roll risk. Week 3, airlines slash schedules. You see it in your app. Fewer choices, odd times, freight piles at hubs because belly cargo rides vanished flights. Dedicated freighters bid up fuel and pick the most profitable lanes, perishables wait. Truckers in Europe feel diesel squeeze, some routes add surcharges, some runs just stop. A Midwestern plastics plant runs out of propylene feed because the cracker upstream prioritized gasoline margins. Auto plants build shy, cars missing a handful of parts stack in lots. Ports from Jebel Ali to Piraeus show ugly rotations, ships late in, berth plans redrawn, cranes idle between lumpy arrivals. By day 20, the first headlines say rising prices. They're late. Week 4, governments tap strategic reserves, press conferences, flags, calibrated drawdowns. It calms futures for a day, maybe 2. Replace rate? 0 because the lane's still cold. Diesel ration rumors leak in 2 EU capitals. Not rationing, they say, prioritizing critical services. Same thing with better PR. Gas storage graphs slope the wrong way. Northeast Asian utilities bid away cargoes that Spanish buyers thought were theirs. Insurance clubs debate exclusions for particular hulls and flags. Owners lawyer up. In the Gulf, maintenance windows slip because spare parts flown in by passenger jets aren't flying. A refiner files a force majeure on a product export because their crude never arrived. That ripples to a landlocked neighbor who counted on that diesel to bring wheat from port to city. Week 5, food bites, not bread yet, inputs. Feed costs spike, poultry producers thin flocks, eggs climb first. Fertilizer buyers blink and skip a cycle, gambling on lower prices later. That's a yield hit 3 months from now. Copper does something weird, price whiplash. Smelters in gas-tight regions throttle, supply dips. At the same time, factories nervous about recession slow orders, traders get whipsawed. Layoffs begin not mass, but surgical. Logistics temp workers, refinery contractors, airline ground crews on short hours. Consumer confidence surveys tick down. A minister on TV says temporary. Markets here indefinite. Week 6, leaders get jumpy. The 30-day rule just tripped. Markets move in hours, militaries fix in weeks. That mismatch gets fatal after a month. Reserve taps look shallow. Inventories at some depots look thin. The rumor mill runs on screenshots. Gas storage charts warn of next season before this one ends. Utilities lobby to extend coal units, activists groan, regulators choose stability now, emissions later. A European cabinet holds a midnight meeting on truck diesel priority, police, ambulances, food distribution first, tourism last. Airlines delete entire city pairs. A pharma warehouse misses an air slot and switches to ocean. The medicine's shelf life laughs. Now the military ladder. Minesweeps deploy first, coalition hulls creeping, helicopters dipping sonar, drones mapping suspicious dots. It's boring, dangerous, and slow. A week of that yields a corridor you might call usable if your premium is paid. Standoff strikes next, cruise missiles arc at suspected missile sites and drone nests along the Iranian coast. Claims and denials follow, the lane, still jumpy. Proxies wake up, rockets from a militia at a Gulf oil terminal. Air defenses intercept, video hits the feed, insurers shake their heads. A U.S. submarine quietly tags a fast boat hub, a satellite shows smoke, a statement reads self-defense. Tehran signals through back channels, we can play metronome. Translation, push us, we pulse the lane. Everything changes when the escorts arrive. Convoys through a sanitized channel with destroyers on the flanks, AWACS overhead, drones on racetracks. It looks strong, it is, until an underwriter asks, who pays when something happens? A near miss, debris on a deck, no hull breach, still resets premiums. A single mine strike with no casualties halts a day of traffic. Captains have families, owners have balance sheets. Courage isn't a business model. Behind the scenes, desperate hacks buy time. Pooled insurance schemes from governments, short-term subsidies on bunker fuel, emergency reserve swaps between allies, quiet waivers on sulfur content to let odd blends move. Some of it works at the margins. None of it reopens Hormuz without risk. Day 45. The public mood turns, protests about prices, then about policy. A government falls in a coalition state over a late-night diesel decree. Migration pressure ticks up along old routes as job sites go quiet. Stocks with long, fragile supply chains underperform. Defense stocks rise. And in one Gulf capital, a room full of officers stares at a desalination plant schematic and a red line. Buffer, 5 days. That's when the room goes cold. So the choice sharpens. Negotiate a narrow, face-saving thaw escorts plus inspection regime plus quiet concessions, or climb the ladder, more strikes, more proxies, maybe a seizure of a key terminal or island. The longer the lane stays shut, the worse the calls get. After day 30, leaders gamble. After day 45, they double down. That's how a resource war becomes a war. There's no summary here, just a clock you can't ignore. Water wars, desalination as a weapon. But the real secret is water, because water ends timelines. You can stretch fuel with rationing and price caps. You can limp through chip shortages, lose city water, and your clock is days, not months. Gulf states live on desalination. It's genius and fragile. Think of a city's throat pressed to a single stainless pipe pointed at the sea. Reverse osmosis membranes or thermal distillers chew brine into drinkable flow, backed by high-pressure pumps, transformers, chlorine systems, and control rooms. The coupling is brutal. Plants need steady power and gas. Cities need steady plants. Kick one leg and the whole stool falls. Here's what actually happens in a hit. You don't need a Hollywood strike. Intake pipes are long, exposed, and often mapped by anyone with a drone and patience. A shaped charge at the seawater intake collapses a section. The pumps cavitate, operators trip the plant to save the membranes. Meanwhile, a second team tosses a quadcopter at the switchyard. One transformer arcs, oil burns, relays trip wide. Power blinks. Operators face a cascade. No suction, no pressure, no power. In 10 minutes, a mega plant goes from nominal to silent. Now the buffer math. Most Gulf cities run storage equal to a handful of days at best. Some districts have less. Tanks ride low because constant flow is normal. Hospitals and data centers hold their own reserves, but households tap municipal pressure. Day 1 taps still run, just slower. Officials say precautionary boil notice to calm nerves. Day 2 pressure drops on upper floors. People fill bathtubs. Grocery shelves lose bottled water by noon. Day 3 tanker trucks roll with police escorts. Fights break out at spigots. Sewer systems get ugly because low flow means clogs. Public health teams start messaging about hygiene. Day 4 to 5, evacuation planning meetings stop being theoretical. That's not panic talk. That's the arithmetic that keeps ministers awake. Power-water coupling makes it worse. These plants are big loads. Knock them offline and the grid loses a sync. Gas turbines ramp and wobble, frequency control strains. If operators try to black start a thermal desal unit, they need stable power first. a chicken and egg you don't solve with speeches. Meanwhile, the gas supply that fed the plant gets redirected to peakers, keeping AC on in 45-degree heat. Demand spikes, fuel burns, margins vanish. Attack surface is cheap to touch, expensive to guard. Intake heads offshore. Long feeder lines ashore. Chlorination rooms with bulk chemicals. Transformer yards that sit behind fences but under open sky. Control networks that vendors patched 5 years ago and never hardened like a bank S. You can do a lot with a $5,000 drone and a $200 modem. And even if defenses catch most shots, defenders must win every time. An attacker needs one lucky morning. Here's the part that pulls neighbors in. If a major plant takes real damage, pressure to join the strikes jumps. Not out of pride, out of math. If you believe the attacker can hit again before full repair, you shorten the war by widening it. Air forces argue for suppressing launch sites, mining depots, and drone workshops. Naval officers push for tighter escorts and coastal strikes. Intelligence services whisper about sabotage inside the attacker's own pump stations as symmetry. Regional politics that were hedging snap into alignment with whoever offers real defense layers. Evacuation math is uglier than headlines allow. Say a city of 5 million needs minimum 2 liters per person per day just to not collapse. That's 10 million liters daily for drinking alone, not counting hygiene, cooking, clinics, and cooling. A road tanker carries maybe 30,000 liters. Do the division. Hundreds of trucks non-stop under heat with clean loading points that themselves need power and security. That's not logistics. That's a moving city with sirens on. Miss a day and hospitals triage dehydration. Miss 2 and you're planning corridor evacuations at sunset. And there's a second-order hit people forget. Industrial water. Refineries, power plants, and data centers consume vast volumes. In a crunch, human use gets priority. Industry throttles. That means less diesel, flickering power, and throttled cloud workloads right when crisis comms need bandwidth. A Desal strike ripples into energy, transport, and data in hours. Once you understand this, stockpiles look small. You can warehouse oil in salt caverns and grain in silos. Water doesn't sit well in giant buffers at city scale without constant turnover. You can pre-position membranes, spare pumps, and transformer parts, sure. You can bury intakes deeper, add redundancy in feeder lines, split plants into modular trains, ring them with SHORAD, counter UAS, and boom nets. All of that helps. None of it turns days into weeks. So what do planners do behind the scenes? Quiet drills moving water by barge at night. Agreements with neighbors for emergency cross-border pipelines and interties. Diesel generator farms staged near plants with fuel contracts that skip peacetime bidding. Hardened control rooms with manual overrides if SCADA goes weird. And perhaps the most important, rehearsed real messaging that tells people exactly where to get water and when, not hope, not platitudes, so panic doesn't win the first hour. This changes everything because it sets a ceiling on escalation time. You can run a fuel crisis on tempers and spreadsheets. A water crisis runs on clocks and body heat. In that world, decisions compress. Restraint loses to removal, the urge to take out the launcher, the depot, the proxy. Which is why when water sits in the crosshairs, a regional resource war can flip to a regional shooting war by the weekend. The rare Earth's trap, from mine to magnet. Look, I'm gonna tell you something that breaks a lot of confident speeches. The mine is not the choke. The choke lives in the chemistry that turns muddy concentrate into a magnet that doesn't demagnetize when it gets hot. That journey, ore to concentrate, concentrate to separated oxides, oxides to metals, metals to alloys, alloys to precision magnets, is 5 doors, and most countries only hold the first key. Here's what actually happens. You dig bastnasite or monazite. Great. You crush, float, and ship a mixed rare earth concentrate. It's like winning a bag of Scrabble tiles all glued together. The magic is separation, solvent extraction with hundreds of mixer-settler stages, finicky pH control, and waste streams nobody wants near a suburb. That's where you split neodymium from praseodymium, peel out dysprosium, and chase purity to 4 nines. Miss a decimal and a motor runs hot, a missile wobbles, or a wind turbine loses output in summer. Most people think sanctions at the mine mouth bite. They don't, not fast. The processing parks control tempo. Export licenses on oxides, metal, or finished magnet blocks can tighten in a week and starve EV lines next month. And because the chain stacks in clusters, separation on one street, metal making down the road, strip casting in the same industrial zone, policy can move through all 3 with one memo. Sanctions backfire here because price spikes don't build capacity. They pause demand. hit dysprosium availability and OEMs triage. EV makers quietly throttle long-range trims first because you can't ship a motor that derates on a hot highway. Drone makers ration airframes for units that actually deploy. Aerospace primes go to the front of every queue by contract. Civilian orders slide right. The optics look like resilience. The factory feels like waiting. Substitution has hard edges. Yes, you can design a ferrite motor with more copper, more iron, more volume. On a city bus, maybe fine. On a missile fin actuator or a high-performance drone, weight kills, heat kills, space is gone. Samarium cobalt works in some high-heat cases but drags cobalt politics and cost volatility back into the room. Grain boundary diffusion cuts dysprosium usage, not need. Physics keeps the bill. Stockpiles are an illusion at scale. A strategic warehouse with a few hundred tons of NdPr oxide looks big on a press release. It's a rounding error against a year of motors if you build cars, turbines, and munitions at once. And oxides are not magnets. You still need metal, alloy, pressing, sintering, machining, and coating lines, each with tools, dies, and QA routines specific to your design. You don't spin that up in a quarter. You grow it over years, with engineers who can smell a bad batch before the spectrometer does. Here's the 30-second behind the scenes. Last spring, a mid-tier auto supplier got a polite email. Allocation revised. Their motor line ran just in time on sintered magnets from a single park. The park had a power curtailment, gas prices spiked, utility ordered a cut, furnaces idled. 2 weeks later, the auto plant switched to delete build. Cars rolled off missing drive units. Inventory looked fine on paper. Rail yards told the truth. Why does this trap hold? Because environmental, capital, and know-how risks all point to clustering. Communities fight solvent extraction permits. Investors want guaranteed offtake before they fund metal. OEMs demand 10 years of price and quality before they certify a magnet vendor. So the cluster that already exists keeps compounding advantage. More waste handling expertise, more chemists, tighter vendor loops, lower unit costs. Can you break it? Yes, but count the meters and the money. You need parallel separation lines, domestic metal plants, alloy furnaces, sintering presses, and finishers. You need grid power that doesn't spike, gas that doesn't wobble, and wastewater systems built to drink ugliness and spit out compliance. You need long-term purchase agreements so a new plant doesn't die in year 3. And you need engineering talent that can run failure analysis at 2 a.m. without calling a vendor 12 time zones away. Trust me, you're not ready for the time cost. This isn't announce a factory. It's qualify, certify, and ramp across defense, auto, and energy at once while prices whiplash. Meanwhile, any Flashpoint, Hormuz, Red Sea, Taiwan bleeds into the magnet lane through power, insurance, and shipping. That's the trap. Even when you think you're out, the corridor pulls you back. Once you see that, proxies become the shortcut, and that's how local wars go global fast. Proxy web, when local wars go international. Now watch how a small fight grows arms. Proxies are the cheapest way to press a valve without wearing the uniform. They blur blame, stretch maps, and let great powers test each other's nerves at discount. Start with Iran's network. Think of it like a mesh, not a chain. In Iraq, you've got militias with political wings, fuel smuggling lines, and drone shops in back alleys. In Syria, supply roads run from Al-Bukamal to the coast, feeding depots that can seed cheap loitering munitions into the Levant. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is the heavyweight, rockets, anti-ship missiles, precision kits, and the ability to light up the northern theater the minute pressure builds in the Gulf. In Yemen, the Houthis sit on the Bab el-Mandeb angle and can launch a $20,000 quadcopter that rewrites a $200 million week for insurers. None of this closes lanes cleanly. It just lifts risk until commerce kneels. Behind the scenes, you'll see fingerprints. Great powers don't announce support, they leave breadcrumbs. Intelligence tips that sharpen target folders, GPS jammers that make drones wander, electronic warfare that blinds a radar for 5 minutes while a convoy slips. Air defenses moved into a partner's base for exercises that stay when the exercise ends. When a proxy raids a depot and finds the lights oddly off, that's not luck, that's a friend with access turning a key. Europe gets pulled in sideways. Bases in Cyprus, Crete, Sicily, quiet runways that host ISR sorties and tanker tracks when lanes wobble. Defense treaties drag parliamentary debates into night sessions. A missile splashes near a French-flagged tanker and suddenly maritime task groups form under bland names. Meanwhile, the home front feels it through migrants landing on islands after a food shock upstream. Politics hardens, markets twitch, insurers rewrite clauses. Europe doesn't want in. Markets vote yes for them. Asia is exposed through energy and chips. Japan and South Korea live on LNG cargoes and semiconductors. A Hormuz squeeze plus a Taiwan scare hits both at once. India watches the Gulf for remittances and oil, and the Indian Ocean for cable cuts and port pressure. Southeast Asia counts containers and flight paths. A Red Sea detour plus fewer Asia-Europe flights dents exporters and tourism. When a proxy touches any of those, Asian central banks don't sleep. They hedge dollars, jawbone fuel taxes, and call Washington and Beijing in the same hour. Africa and Latin America are the swing states of stuff. Cobalt and copper from the Congo and Zambia. Manganese from South Africa. Lithium from Chile and Argentina. Bauxite from Guinea. Soy, corn, and meat from Brazil and Argentina into a world of pricier feed and freight. These places don't need missiles to become decisive. They need a customs delay, a port strike, a power outage at a smelter because gas spiked in another continent. Proxies show up as consultants, security contractors, training missions, and infrastructure partners. The pitch is simple: pick our lane, we ensure your flow, the price is leverage later. Here's a micro story to hold. A militia in Iraq launches a short drone at a fuel terminal serving exports to a neighbor. Minimal damage, big video, insurers hike rates for a week. A refinery downstream pauses product exports, and a landlocked country 2 borders away can't haul grain from port to capital on schedule. Street protests start over bread and fuel. An embassy calls for stability. A rival power offers cut-rate diesel for friendship. That's a proxy's ripple. The web works both ways. Gulf states fund local partners to hit drone depots, track financiers, and pressure smuggling lines. Israel airs out factories in Syria that push precision kits to Lebanon. America leans on sanctions, cyber, and over-the-horizon strikes to keep the metronome down. Europe runs maritime security corridors with careful rules of engagement. China keeps quiet publicly, then adjusts export licenses on a critical alloy for 2 weeks so a message lands. Russia sells air defenses and oil swaps to whatever capital wants a hedge. Everyone says de-escalation. Everyone nudges a lever. And proxies learn. They mix cheap and smart. A $6,000 FPV drone with a $400 thermal camera and a 53D printed fin can bully a $10 million schedule. A Telegram channel posts AIS screenshots and crew rosters. Morale wobbles. A spoofed email from insurers reroutes a ship to a safer anchorage where a boarding team waits. It's not just bombs, it's admin. You probably think governments can just cut the strings. Sometimes they can. Arrests, throttled finance, border raids. But cut 1 and 2 grow back because incentives didn't change. A movement gets legitimacy when it makes prices move. The more the 5 valves matter, the more proxies sprout near them. Behind the scenes, there's one strike planners fear most. A proxy hitting something that looks civilian but acts strategic. A power water node feeding a data center cluster. A grain elevator at a river port that backstops a subsidy program. An undersea cable landing that quietly carries air traffic control data and payments. Touch that and a local war goes international by Monday morning. So the pattern is set. Local grievances power the fighters. Regional patrons pay the bills. Distant giants calibrate, deny, and poke. Markets overreact. Insurance ossifies it. And the web tightens around the valves we mapped. That's why the next false ending tempts generals and ministers both. Sees something visible, force an outcome, and hope the web untangles. It doesn't. It knots tighter. False ending 2. Sees the island and the war. This is going to sound crazy, but the cleanest idea in a messy war is also the most seductive trap. Grab the island, grab the terminal, and force the enemy to blink. You've heard the pitch. Take the export node, choke their cash, reopen the lane under your guns. Simple map. Strong headline. Problem solved, right? Trust me, you're not ready for the fine print. Seizing an island export terminal looks tactical. The bill arrives strategic. First, the short-term leverage is real. You plant a flag on the loading arms that move most of a country's oil. Their budget bleeds, their war chest shrinks, their allies get nervous. The markets cheer for 2 days because clarity. Then the problems stack. The island is close to shore. That means drones, cruise missiles, and cheap boats reach you every hour of the day. Air superiority helps until a swarm breaks through a gap and kisses a fuel farm. Suddenly your garrison is a fire department. Every resupply is a combat flight. Every barge crossing a lottery ticket. You can hold dirt with Marines. You hold hoses with luck. Second, you don't stop the blockade by owning a berth. The lane is the water between coasts, not the pier. Mines seated in the approaches still idle captains. Underwriters still price risk, not flags. A single splash within binocular distance of your convoy and half the week's traffic waits for daylight. You can hammer shore batteries, sure. The adversary meets you with proxies, decoys, and a metronome of threats that keep insurers honest and ships cautious. Your victory photo sits on a deserted terminal. Third, escalation choices get worse. The enemy's cash flow drops, so they hunt symmetric pain. Pipelines that bypass the strait, suddenly technical issues. Gas plants feeding your allies, surprise outages. And the nuclear option in the theater, the Desal strikes we just walked through, climbs the ladder. If you've parked yourself on their economic throat, they'll reach for your city's throats. You don't have months to play chess when water clocks count in days. Everything changes when prices react the wrong way. People assume taking an export node lowers oil prices. In practice, supply off the market spikes the curve. Refiners panic buy odd barrels, blends go weird, diesel tightens, airlines slash more routes. So now you're paying more at the pump for a win. And insurgent pressure never sleeps. The longer you hold a visible prize, the more it attracts nightly harassment. FPV drones at dusk, mortars under cloud, divers in the pilings. Cyber pokes at your terminal control, your force protection balloons. Your logistics tail thickens. Suddenly, to hold leverage, you're diverting destroyers, ISR, and air defense layers you needed to sanitize the lane itself. Micro story. A decade ago, a force seized a small gas platform in a contested zone. Great PR. Within weeks, small boats harassed supply runs, a stray missile scared a tug, and insurers walked. The platform never produced another safe cubic meter while it was owned. It became a billboard that soaked up air cover. When they left, the price action didn't care. Therefore, tactical wins can deepen strategic traps. You trade a visible success for a longer, wider war of maintenance. You also harden your opponent's resolve. Populations rally around stolen landmarks. Elites who considered negotiation stiffen. Proxies recruit with your footage. You might ask, what about precision decapitation? Hit the loading arms, leave. Same issue, slower burn. Repairs happen under tarps with spare parts you didn't count, and in the meantime, product shifts to smaller ports, road tankers, and shadow fleets with flags you can't chase without widening the war. You break one spigot. They build 10 hoses. Prices stay high. Blame points at you. Once you see it, the ladder is clear. Take the island, suffer the swarm, then reach for Desal, pipelines, cables to force true leverage. That's not closure, that's escalation. The map doesn't simplify, it knots. Which is why the only moves that break the spiral aren't glamorous. Their layered defense, parallel routes, and processing moved closer to home, expensive, slow, and the only way out. Breaking the spiral, 3 levers that actually work. Okay, so if grabbing islands is a trap, what actually works? 3 levers. They're boring, expensive, and they move the needle without lighting the map on fire. Lever 1, chokepoint hardening. Not press releases, layers. Think mine countermeasures on a schedule, not a scramble. You want unmanned sweepers that live in theater, helos practiced on the local seabed, and side-scan sonar maps updated weekly like weather. Overhead, persistent drones and maritime patrol aircraft stitch radar gaps with AIS sanity checks. On the flanks, layered air defense. Short-range guns and lasers for cheap drones, point defense missiles for faster threats, and jammers tuned to the local spectrum so spoofing dies. Convoys run tight lanes with electronic decoys and towable arrays that sniff for wakes and acoustic oddities. Pilots and tugmasters get hazard pay and joint drills with destroyer skippers. So language isn't a barrier at 2 a.m., and here's the quiet one: harbor defense. Nets, boom barriers, swimmer detection, and roving patrols around fuel farms and desal intakes. You don't secure a strait. You build a routine that makes risk boring again. This matters because insurers don't price heroism, they price predictability. When you can hand a syndicate a binder that says, swept channel X miles wide, updated at 60 daily, escort rules, response times, shore threat suppression cadence, premiums slip from crisis to nuisance. Not cheap, but payable. Energy flows on paperwork before it flows on water. Lever 2, parallel routes. Yeah, concrete and steel. But the payoff is outsized because redundancy multiplies resilience. Overland pipes that bypass single straits, old ideas, new capacity with block valves and pigging stations placed for fast isolation. Rail spines that move grain and containers when a canal hiccups, double-tracked, electrified with inland dry ports that pre-clear customs so ports aren't choke points. Add storage, forward diesel depots near distribution hubs, LNG tanks sited off main lanes, grain silos inland with rail links, not just quayside mountains. And don't forget overland fiber. Lay alternate terrestrial cables that route around the obvious cable beds, then mesh metro rings so a single backhoe doesn't cut a region. This is the 2 is 1, 1 is none approach, scaled to continents. People push back on cost. Fine, count the detours. A Cape reroute burns weeks and cash every lap. One solid pipeline or a rail corridor with smart dispatch pays for itself the first bad season. But you have to build smart. Protect pump stations and substations with berms, sensors, and rapid repair kits, spare transformers staged within a day's haul, modular valve houses, and contracts with crane operators on retainer. You don't just add lanes, you pre-wire the tow trucks. Lever 3, processing, reshoring, and diversification. The choke sits in chemistry and metallurgy, so move those steps closer to demand and spread them across trusted partners. Build rare earth separation plants with closed-loop solvents and real waste handling. Stand up metal and alloy lines, then seed magnet pressing and sintering shops near motor makers. On chips, don't just do fabs, do gas purification, photoresists, quartzware, and tool refurb centers. For the grid, expand electrical steel rolling, conductor plants, and transformer factories with standardized designs so spares swap cleanly. Here's where most plans die, price shocks. Governments have to bridge the valley. Long-term offtake contracts, floor price guarantees, accelerated depreciation, and fast-track permits tied to clean processes. Train people, scholarship programs for chemical engineers, welders, transformer techs, and mine enviro teams. And line up power that doesn't blink, dedicated feeders, on-site backup, and water rights that survive a dry year. If that sounds like industrial policy, it is. The alternative is hoping the memo on export licenses never lands. Cost truth time, it's trillions, years, and political will. No one wins an election on sintered magnet capacity, so you stack interim hacks to buy time. Pooled insurance schemes underwritten by states to cap war risk. Naval convoying with published windows so owners can plan. Reserve swaps, diesel for LNG, grain for grain, pre-negotiated with allies so taps open in a week, not a month. You also run joint drills with private operators. Port cranes under blackout, pipeline restart after a cyber trip, cable repair rendezvous under escort. When it's muscle memory, you shave days. Behind the scenes, you need a trust architecture. Quiet hotlines between rivals to deconflict convoys. Escrow mechanisms that release payments when cargo clears agreed corridors, even if capitals hate each other. Third-party verification, neutral surveyors who stamp, safe lane so insurers follow. And a red lines ledger, mutual no-go targets like desal plants, hospitals, and primary cable landings. Not grand treaties, faxable lists everyone respects because crossing them ends careers. Everything changes when you remember the 30-day rule. Markets panic fast, militaries calm slow. These levers shrink that gap. Harden lanes so premiums fall by week 2, not month 2. Build parallels so detours don't break margins. Move processing so a license tweak abroad doesn't idle a factory at home. None of this is sexy. All of it is how you stop a resource war from turning into a world war. The 30-day rule, markets versus militaries. Are you sitting down? Because this is the number that decides whether a scare becomes a spiral. 30 days. Markets move in hours. Militaries fix in weeks. If a disruption lasts longer than a month, systems start breaking in ways price can't patch. Here's what actually happens. Day 1 to 7, traders reprice risk. Futures jump, options explode, war risk premiums bake into freight. You feel it at the margins, airline surcharges, a bump at the pump whispers about delays. Everyone tells themselves it's a blip. Inventories smile and soak the shock. Days 8 to 14, logistics planners get creative. They reroute ships, swap cargoes, shuffle refinery diets, push maintenance, burn stockpiles a little faster. Central banks jawbone, politicians hold pressers, insurers widen clauses, spreadsheets still balance. It looks like control because the shelves are mostly fine. Days 15 to 21, the quiet seams start to pull. That valve someone delayed. It misses a dock window, the spare transformer that was on the way. It's stuck behind a new screening rule. Airlines delete a wave of flights because belly cargo can't pay for fuel. A fertilizer plant decides to idle for a week on gas costs and misses a crop window. Ops managers hold longer stand-ups, procurement calls get tense. Everyone waits for normal to return tomorrow. Day 22 to 30, the physics of flow wins the argument. Inventory buffers narrow to red lines. Replacement cargoes aren't just pricey, they're late. Diesel distributors push priority customers to the front. That's rationing with nicer words. Ports go lumpy, 5 ships one day, none the next, so cranes idle and truck queues build. Bond desks notice credit spreads widen for firms with long, fragile chains. Cabinet ministers start using words like allocation and temporary measures. That's the edge. Cross day 30 and you enter a different game. Price can't pull forward cargo that's physically trapped. Insurance can't make captains brave. A military can't sanitize a channel overnight. So leaders grab faster levers, export bans to protect voters, strategic reserve taps beyond planned cadence, quiet pressure on allies for friendly cargoes, and emergency waivers to run old coal or dirty blends just to keep power up. Every one of those buys a week and breaks something else. This is important because politics lives on daily headlines, but infrastructure runs on quarterly lead times. The mismatch tempts risky calls. After a month, you see escalation creep. Convoy schedules with looser rules of engagement, cyber pokes at depots you previously left alone, a temporary tariff on a mineral that kneecaps a rival's factory. The metronome of the disruption, every morning's premium, every evening's delay report, becomes the drumbeat that pushes rational people into bad bets. Micro story. Last cycle, a short LNG squeeze rolled past week 4. Utilities had hedges. By day 32, 2 mid-sized plants had burned through theirs. A finance minister green-lit emergency coal returns he swore he'd never allow. Power stayed on. Grid maintenance slid a quarter. 6 months later, a summer storm took out 2 transformers that should have been swapped in spring. That's the 30-day echo. Everything changes when you accept that after a month the damage isn't linear. It compounds. Truck diesel tightens, so restocking slows, so retail demand bunches, so warehouses miss picks, so labor hours spike, so margins vanish, so someone cuts shifts, so a local bank pulls a line, so a supplier misses payroll. And now a political story about greed masks a plumbing failure you could have mapped. Therefore, the world war risk doesn't peak on day 1 of a crisis. It peaks after the first month. That's when leaders look at shallow stock levels, angrier streets, sharper polls, and partners hedging away, and they decide to gamble, clear the straight faster, seize a node, squeeze a rival with a license, touch a proxy you swore you'd ignore. They don't do it because they're reckless. They do it because the clock ate their options. So remember this rule. If you can harden lanes, spin up parallels, and pre-wire insurance and reserve swaps to bend that arc inside 30 days, markets will cool before militaries heat. If you can't, you're not managing prices, you're managing panic. And panic is the accelerant that turns a resource war into a shooting war. The home front, how this hits you. Look, I'm going to tell you something most headlines skip. You don't feel a resource war as war. You feel it as little frictions that stack, a flight that vanishes, a part that's backordered, a bill that creeps. Then 1 week it all lands at once and your routine cracks. Fuel and food hit first. You'll see the gas station roll out a quiet surcharge, then 2 weeks later your grocery total looks wrong. It's not one item, it's the mix: eggs up because feed jumped, milk up because diesel to the dairy spiked, frozen veggies up because the ship did an extra lap around a cape. Restaurants shave portions, not prices. Delivery fees feel stickier. Your commute app shows a fuel fee that wasn't there last month. Flights don't just get pricey, they evaporate. The last flight out on Tuesday becomes no service. Red eyes get chopped because belly cargo can't carry the fuel bill. You try to rebook and land 3 airports away at 2 a.m., then baggage takes an hour because ground crews are thin and ramps are jammed at weird times. Business trips stack onto Zoom. Family plans slip. If you've got kids at school out of state, you plan rides 2 steps ahead. Shortages feel random. 1 week it's furnace filters, the next it's a specialty antibiotic, then it's windshield wiper blades. The pattern isn't a pattern. It's 1,000 weak links pulling in different weeks. A small gasket is missing and a plant idles. A labeling rule changes and a pharmacy shipment sits in a warehouse for 4 days. You don't see the choke point, you feel the gap. Jobs start to wobble where chains are long. Logistics temp shifts get cut first. Auto plants run build shy and send folks home early because one chip didn't clear customs. Construction crews idle because a transformer for a new site slid 12 weeks and now the lender is edgy. Freelancers feel it in weird ways, late payments. Can we push this deliverable? Fewer flights, smaller per diems. If you move things or build things, you'll feel the stutter. Cities get brittle in ways you thought were boring. Water main breaks take longer to fix because a pipe size is backordered, and the crew that knows that street moved to nights. A substation trips in a heat wave, and the spare transformer isn't local. Rolling outages that were summer only creep towards spring and fall. Traffic lights blink 4-way stop at rush hour because the control cabinet is waiting for a part on a ship that's waiting for an escort through a strait. And data, you'll hear it in tiny delays. Your trading app refresh lags at 9:31. Video calls get grainy at odd hours because a cable route is carrying rerouted traffic. A game patch that used to land in minutes crawls. If you run a small business on cloud tools, a 1-hour slowdown feels like a day. Latency is just another word for we share the same pipes. Now this is important because panic prep won't help. You don't need a bunker, you need buffers, alternatives, and timing. 3 moves. First, time shift your life a little. If you can, stack a small fuel and food buffer when prices dip for a week. Dry goods you use anyway, a second propane tank, a quarter tank more in the car as a habit. Order critical meds a week early so you're never day-to-day on a refill. If your job relies on a single part or supplier, pull one extra into a locker. It's not hoarding, it's margin. Second, diversify weak points. 2 routes to work, 2 ways to pay, 2 places to get the same item. If you've got a car, keep the tires and battery healthy. That's your cheapest reliability. If you rely on public transit, save the bus alt route in your phone for your main line. If you live in a walk-up, store some water where you can reach it if pressure drops on upper floors. If you're in a house, know where your water shutoff is. Leaks during supply weirdness get messy fast. Third, build small local networks. A friend with a truck, a neighbor with a generator who's willing to share freezer space, a pharmacy tech who can tell you when shipments land, a shop owner who'll text you when the part trucks arrive. In a month 30 world, information beats lines. 5 texts can save you 5 hours. Money choices matter. Don't chase every price spike. If you can't avoid it, smooth it. Top up a little more often instead of riding empty. Split big buys with trusted friends. If you own a business, talk to your bank before you feel the squeeze. Lines get pulled late, not early. Negotiate flexible deliveries with suppliers now, not after they miss. And mindset matters most. The first time you hit an empty shelf, you'll feel like everything is breaking. It is. It's lumpy. Breathe, check your alt, and move. Routines that assume perfect sync are the first to crack. Routines with slack bend and keep you sane. One last behind-the-scenes story. A mid-sized city ran a water boil notice during a transformer failure at a treatment plant. People with 5-gallon jugs from last summer's camping trip were fine. Folks with tight schedules melted down at customer service lines. The fix wasn't heroics. It was a spare transformer on a flatbed staged 2 hours away, a utility crew that had practiced the swap, and a mayor who posted clear pickup points for bottled water with maps, not vibes. Prep wasn't panic. It was paperwork done last year. So here's your rule of thumb. If a disruption passes inside 30 days, you'll feel price, not pain. If it rolls past a month, plan on friction in flights, fuel, food, and fixes. Your play is margin, not miracles. Buffers, alternatives, timing. Once you see the map like that, the headlines stop feeling random, and you stop being surprised when the clock runs loud. Closing loops, the hidden 1950s thread revealed. Okay, so here's the thing we've been circling without naming. The 1950s didn't end. The logic baked then still runs the corridor map now. Different cargo, same code. After the war, security law got wired to flows. Subversion wasn't just pamphlets, it was pipes, rails, ports, and people who could flip them. That's why internal security statutes, basing deals, and maritime doctrines hardened around routes. Sea lanes were lifelines, forward bases were fuses. Areas of vital interest quietly meant where our fuel and food move. The language was ideology. The targets were infrastructure. Development banks joined the blueprint. Loans came with corridors attached, export roads to ports, dams that powered smelters, rail built to pull ore outward. Strategic stockpiles weren't a panic buy. They were a permanent setting, oil in caverns, grain in silos, metals stacked in sheds with clipboards and clip-on badges. The nuclear era sealed it. Secure uranium, patrol the straits, forward deploy. The world was a circuit, defense meant keeping current. Here's the twist, those laws and patterns never sunset. They ossified. Agencies got missions, budgets followed, careers grew in the grooves. Even when the Cold War flag came down, the scaffolding stayed up. The same committees that once watched pamphlets started watching pipelines. The same lawyers who wrote subversion memos wrote sanctions and critical infrastructure memos. Same verbs, new nouns. Then the 2020s swapped the cargo. Wafers slid into the slot once used by barrels. Magnets took the place of refined fuels. Grids replaced rail as the vital mesh. Data road in the lane, once reserved for tankers and cables, became the new coaling stations. But the 1950s guardrails didn't budge. We slotted new resources into old frames. That's why semiconductors got treated like battleships. Export controls read like convoy schedules. Licenses mapped to see charts. A Dutch tool riding a ship through a risky strait suddenly felt strategic because the system treats choke points as national arteries. Rare earth separation parks became the modern refinery logic: permit pain, chemistry risk, lobby heat. The language of security of supply just moved from octane to oxides. Stockpiles, same playbook. Petroleum reserves, grain reserves, and now, quietly, gas storage, transformer spares, and a handful of magnet and alloy buffers. The problem we keep hitting is the time constant. We can fill a cavern in months. We can't birth a fab or a separation plant in a fiscal year. The 1950s machine was built for tanks and tankers. The 2020s game needs chemistry benches and cleanrooms. The rules didn't update, the map did. Sea power continuity explains the flashpoints we walked. Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, the Turkish Straits, Taiwan's lanes, the Arctic routes, everyone is a 1950s chapter title with a 2020s footnote. The Nile Dam fight? Swap canal for megawatt, and you're reading a Suez replay with a grid. Undersea cables, the new telegraph lines with the same sabotage lore. And those internal security definitions, they grew into our modern critical infrastructure doctrine. A refinery, a substation, a data center farm, a water plant, protect them like they're bases because in the old logic they were. That's why a drone near an intake pipe triggers language that sounds like a troop movement. Behind the scenes, the same offices that stamped clearance in the 1950s right exclusion zone today. The names changed. The muscle memory didn't. This is important because it closes the loop on why markets and militaries keep stepping on each other's toes. The 1950s coded the military to guard lanes and punish closures. The 2020s made markets dependent on lanes that move parts you can't see and timelines you can't compress. So when a flashpoint hits, the old reflex, escorts, strikes, seizures, collides with the new reality, chemistry lead times, insurer vetoes, data dependencies. That gap isn't incompetence. It's inheritance. Remember how we said one disruption hits 3 systems now? That's the 1950s map doing its job too well. It bundled flows for efficiency under the promise of protection. It worked, until the cargo multiplied and the threats got cheaper. Now a $6,000 drone can bend a $600 million week because the corridor concentrates value by design. So here's the thread pulled tight. Security logic from the 195 still drives corridor control. Stockpiles, basing, and sea power shaped today's fragility. New resources were jammed into old guardrails, wafers, magnets, data, without changing the timing or the trust. And the flashpoints line up with this architecture by design, not luck. Once you see that, the map reads like a playbook, not a mystery. Which means your move isn't wishful thinking. It's choosing where to rewrite the 195's code. Lanes hardened for drones and lawyers, parallels built on land and fiber, and processing pulled out of single memo towns. Do that, and the next scare bends before day 30. Skip it, and the clock writes policy for you. So the point is simple. Resource choke points, not slogans, not flags, set today's war risk because we kept old corridors and loaded them with new cargo. If you want the deep dives, subscribe and stick with me. Next, I'll break down the exact Hormuz math, the rare earths cartel pricing engine, and the Desal war game, plus the 5-layer defense blueprint that can stop a closure cold.